It started like any other day in court, until one arrogant cop made a deadly mistake. He targeted Ayanna Pierce, a calm black woman he assumed was just another face in the crowd. But what didn't he know? She's one of the highest-ranking federal agents in the country, and today, she's here to expose everything. In a single breath, racism, ego, and unchecked power collide. Ayanna doesn't flinch, because this isn't her first fight. It's a takedown, and it's aimed at everyone who thought they were untouchable. Hit subscribe if you're ready to see what happens when justice bites back. You won't believe what unfolds when the wrong woman gets pushed too far. Ayanna Pierce felt the cold slam of the courtroom door behind her, but she didn't slow her pace. Detective Braxton hadn't removed her because she was disruptive. He'd removed her because she was black, because she dared to sit in silence and watch. Ayanna had seen it before, too many times. He had embarrassed her and dismissed her, made a show of it, and though she kept her face calm, her hands trembled when she reached the end of the corridor. She pulled out her phone and texted her team. Phase 1 triggered early. Initiate Plan B. She arrived at her hotel, slipped inside, and locked the door. Her laptop hummed to life. Files opened. Names lit up. The evidence, timelines, and corrupted footage all pointed to one thing: a deliberate cover-up. She had it all. But she didn't have time. Braxton had taken the bait too soon, and now she was exposed. They would come looking. Fast. She typed out an emergency brief to the bureau, fingers flying. Then, just as she hit send, she heard a knock at the door. 3 knocks, then silence. This one wasn't part of the plan. She rose slowly, pressing her ear to the door. Another knock. Ms. Pierce, Charleston PD. We need to ask you a few questions. She didn't answer. The voice came again, firmer. We have a few concerns about your presence in court this morning. You can open the door, or we can return with a warrant. Ayanna's pulse pounded. This one was it. They were trying to trap her, push her into panic, make her run. But she wasn't running. She was fighting. She cracked the door slightly, keeping the chain on. This is harassment, she said. You removed me from a public courtroom and now you're at my door? We just need clarification. You'll get it, she said. Through the proper channels. She shut the door, locked every bolt. Then, shaking slightly, she paced the room. Her laptop pinged. Reply from the bureau. Stand down, relocate, avoid confrontation. But Ayanna couldn't stand down. Not now. Not after what happened. Not after Braxton stood in that courtroom and humiliated her like she didn't matter. She'd lived her whole life dodging racism like it was weather, unavoidable, but predictable. But this was a storm, and it was getting worse. Later that night, she changed hotels, burned her location, rerouted her signal. She thought she was safe, until her phone buzzed again. Unknown caller. She stared at the screen, her breath shallow. She answered. Running already? Braxton's voice sneered on the line. Didn't think you'd crack this fast. Ayanna didn't reply. You might have some files, some noise, but that's not enough to bring them down. But I own this town. I've been wearing this badge longer than you've dreamed. Still, she said nothing. Why don't you save yourself the trouble and return to wherever you came from? This one is Charleston. We don't bend to outsiders. Then silence. Then the click. Ayanna stood there, shaking. Not in fear, but in fury. How many people had heard that same voice and folded? How many young black men, how many single mothers, how many elders trying to report the truth had been silenced by that same tone? She could feel them behind her now, not literally, but spiritually. Every victim, every name, everyone was walking with her, and that's when she made her decision. She wasn't going to run. She was going to make sure everyone saw this for what it was. The next day, she went back to court. This time, she didn't sit in the back. She walked straight down the aisle. Every head turned. Some are in shock. Some are in fear. Some in hope. Braxton was already there, sitting smug at the prosecution table. He turned, saw her, and the blood drained from his face. She handed a folder to the court clerk. The clerk hesitated, opened it, then blinked and walked it straight to the judge. The judge read the contents, looked up. Court acknowledges the presence of Deputy Director Ayanna Pierce, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The room erupted. Gasps, whispers. Even the bailiff shifted awkwardly, unsure of what to do. Ayanna stood tall, voice calm. Effective immediately, we are launching federal charges against Detective Hank Braxton for obstruction of justice, tampering with evidence, and multiple civil rights violations. Braxton jumped to his feet. This is a setup! You can't! Ayanna met his eyes. You're not above the law, Hank. You never were. The agents moved in. The cuffs went on. And for the first time in a long time, the courtroom felt like justice might finally be possible. Ayanna didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just stood still. This one wasn't a victory, far from it. It was just the beginning. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories that shine light on hidden truths, that stand against racism and demand justice, then subscribe to this channel. Your voice and presence help ensure people like Ayanna Pierce never stand alone. The story isn't over. Stay with us to see how it ends. Ayanna Pierce stood in the courthouse hallway, the echo of Braxton's voice still rattling in her ears even though he was gone, led away in cuffs. As she walked out of the courthouse, alone, reporters shouted questions she didn't answer. Her hotel room was quiet. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, haunted not by Braxton's arrest, but by the faces of those who had never gotten this moment. And she thought of the ones who never got to testify. Those who had passed away still believed no one cared enough to listen. She'd carried their voices in her heart for months, years even, but tonight they felt like ghosts pressing on her chest. She couldn't sleep. Slurs, promises of retribution. Letters slid under her hotel door with no return address, one with a noose drawing and another with the words, "Stay in D.C. where you belong." Ayanna cut deeper, and there was silence from people who should have stood with her. Colleagues who had once praised her now avoided eye contact. Leaders who had quietly supported the investigation were now slow to return calls. "You're stirring the pot too hard," one senior agent had told her. "You're turning one bad cop into a war." Despite the growing hostility, Ayanna pushed forward. Every morning, she sat in the front row of Braxton's federal trial, notebook in hand, face unreadable, watched witnesses testify about years of mistreatment, humiliation, violence. She kept her composure even as the stories grew darker. And then came the nightmares. One night, she woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The image of Braxton smirking burned behind her eyelids. In the dream, he wasn't the one in cuffs. He was the judge. And he slammed the gavel down on her instead. She shot up in bed and screamed. She was cracking. And no one knew. Until one afternoon, she received a call from her younger brother, Malik. He'd seen the coverage. He asked how she was holding up. She said she was fine. But something in her voice gave her away. "Don't lie to me, Ayanna," he said gently. "I know that voice. Remember that voice you used when you told Mom you were okay after the accident, but your arm is broken." She closed her eyes, tears finally sliding down her cheeks. "I'm tired, Malik," she whispered. "So damn tired. And I don't even know if it will change anything." He didn't try to convince her otherwise. He just listened. That was all she needed. For once, someone to just listen. The trial wore on. The prosecution laid out the evidence case after case, witness after witness. And Ayanna watched it all like a woman watching her past unfold. Because long before she was Deputy Director Ayanna Pierce, she had been just another black girl stopped by a cop who didn't believe she belonged in a neighborhood her family had lived in for generations. She had been 17, wearing a hoodie, carrying her little brother's backpack. They searched her, called her hostile, and threatened to call Child Protective Services when she asked why. That was the day she decided to become an agent. Not because she wanted to wear the badge, but she never wanted another kid to feel what she felt in that moment. Powerless. Years later, she held the files, built the cases, and delivered the truth. But it came at a price. On the third week of the trial, Ayanna fainted. She had skipped breakfast and hadn't slept in 2 days. She rose too fast from the courtroom bench, and the room spun. Her knees buckled, and the world went dark for a second. When she opened her eyes, she was on the floor. Someone was yelling her name. A paramedic knelt beside her, asking her to breathe slowly. Her body shook with shame. Cameras were everywhere. She couldn't afford to see it like this. But she couldn't move. They took her out on a stretcher. And for the first time, the world saw what the fight cost her. She stayed quiet the next day. No court, no press. Just her in her hotel room, staring at her reflection in the mirror, seeing someone she barely recognized. Hollow eyes, shaky hands. But when she looked deeper, she also saw the girl in the hoodie, still standing, and still fighting, still here. The trial ended. The verdict came. Guilty. All counts. And still Ayanna didn't cry. Not until the courtroom emptied, and she was alone, sitting in the pews, her head bowed, her hands gripping the leather cover of her notebook like it was the only thing keeping her together. She cried not because Braxton was convicted, but because she knew he wasn't the only one. There were others, and just. And she couldn't fight them all alone, but maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to, because that evening, something changed. Outside the courthouse, a woman in her 70s approached her with trembling hands. "My grandson," she said, voice shaking. "He was arrested by Braxton in 2009. No one ever believed us, but today they might." Then a young man in a denim jacket nodded at her with tears in his eyes. "You didn't just arrest him. You arrested the lie." And slowly, people gathered. Not shouting and not protesting, and just standing with her. For the first time, Ayanna wasn't alone. The pain hadn't vanished. The fight wasn't over. But something had shifted. That night, back in her room, she opened a fresh file. A new case. Another name, another story. She clicked record on her laptop and whispered, "To anyone out there who's still afraid to speak, who thinks no one will believe you, who has made you feel small, I see you. And I'm not done yet. If Ayanna's story moved you, if you believe in standing up against racism, injustice, and unchecked power, subscribe to this channel. Help us make sure these voices are heard loud and clear. Justice isn't a single moment, it's a journey. And with your support, we walk it together." She finally descended the courthouse stairs slowly. People moved aside. Some reached for her hand. But Ayanna barely heard them. Her legs felt heavy. Back in her hotel, Ayanna locked the door and peeled off her coat, letting it fall to the floor. She sat on the edge of the bed. The tears came fast, hot, silent, long overdue. She sobbed into her palms, alone in that small room with only the weight of everything she'd carried for 18 months, now pressing full force against her ribs. It was the part no one saw. The after. The unraveling. The breakdown after the build-up. The grief after the gavel. Her phone buzzed. Messages poured in. Journalists, activists, survivors, supporters. She couldn't read them all. Her vision was blurry. Her hands were unsteady. But one message stopped her. It was from Malik, her little brother. "I'm proud of you. You did what most people wouldn't even dare. But please, come home." She stared at the screen, her lip trembling. She hadn't seen her family in nearly a year. She'd stayed away to protect them from threats, retaliation, and the firestorm she knew would follow Braxton's arrest. But now, she felt the deep human need to see, to be held, to be reminded that she wasn't just a symbol of justice. She was still a sister, a daughter, a person. But she knew the job was far from finished. That night, She couldn't sleep. Again. She sat at her desk, reviewing a new case file. Another name. The corruption hadn't stopped. It had simply scattered. And though Ayanna wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed and disappear under the covers, she knew she couldn't yet. Because every time she tried to rest, she heard those courtroom voices in her mind, the victims who stood trembling on the stand. The older man, whose hands shook as he recounted, shoved in front of his wife. They told the mother to go back to bingo night when she tried to ask about her son. Their pain was now part of her, and it refused to be quiet. At 3:12 a.m., Ayanna closed the laptop and walked into the bathroom. She stared at her reflection under the fluorescent lights. The woman who looked back at her had tired eyes, dark circles, and a faint scar above her left brow from the fall that had taken place weeks earlier. But she also saw something else. Stillness. Strength. Fire. She wiped her face with cold water and whispered to her reflection, "You didn't break." But that was a lie she had broken. Many times. Quietly. Silently. But somehow she had learned to break without shattering. And that was its kind of strength. The following day, she went to visit Ayanna Pierce. The woman greeted her at the door with tears in her eyes. Her wrist still bore a faint indentation. Years later, a reminder of the moment her life shattered. But when she saw Ayanna, she smiled through her sadness. "You did it," she whispered, pulling her into a hug. "You didn't let him win." Ayanna hugged her tightly, burying her face in her shoulder. "I did it for you," she whispered back. "For all of you." Later that day, Ayanna visited Eli Tate's family, then George Harlan, the elderly teacher. She made stops not for press or optics, but because she needed to see to remind herself that this fight meant something. It wasn't just about taking down a corrupt cop, but about giving lives back. But something happened that afternoon that shook her again. A man followed her to her car as she left the grocery store near her hotel. "Detective Pierce," he called. She turned, guarded. He smiled, not warmly. "You think you did something noble? You just turned this city upside down. We'll be cleaning up your mess for years." She didn't answer, just stared. He leaned closer. "You think people respect what you did? Half the department wants your head. You'll never be welcome here again." Ayanna didn't speak, but she didn't move either. And finally she said, "If I wanted to be welcomed, I would have stayed silent. But I didn't come here for comfort. I came for the truth." He scoffed. "Whatever helps you sleep at night." She locked eyes with him. "I don't sleep much." He walked away, but the words stayed. That night she cried again, not because she was scared, but because she was tired of fighting a war where the enemy wore a badge and a smile. Tired of being the only one in the room raising her voice, tired of knowing that behind every win there were still more losses. And yet she got up again the following day, and the next. Because for Ayanna Pierce, giving up was never an option. She testified in front of the city council. She held press briefings about reform. She walked into police union meetings with data, files, and fire in her voice. They tried to cut her off. She kept speaking. They rolled their eyes. She kept pressing. They questioned her loyalty. She answered with the truth. Every single time. And the more she pushed, the more others followed. New investigations opened. More officers came forward. More victims found their voice. And slowly, the tide began to shift. Not because the system changed, but because she refused to back down. Ayanna Pierce is still standing, still hurting, still healing, but still fighting. So take a moment, right now, and press the like button to support Ayanna, not just because she's a character, but because she represents real women, real stories, real pain, and real courage. Like this video to show her you see her, you hear her, you believe in her. Most people thought Ayanna Pierce's story began the day she stood in a Charleston courtroom and took down Detective Hank Braxton with a single piece of paper. But that moment, powerful as it was only the spark. The real story was hidden deeper. It began a year earlier, when she received a blank envelope slid under her office door. Inside, a flash drive and a hand-scrawled note that read, "Start with the Tate case. He's not the only one." No sender, no explanation, just a whisper in the dark. Most agents would have handed it over to a T and flagged it, reported it. But Ayanna didn't. She waited until everyone left, locked her office door, and played the video. What she saw was grainy but unmistakable. Detective Braxton deleting footage from an evidence locker, alone, late at night. And in the bottom corner, barely visible, a timestamp that didn't match official records. That was the moment Ayanna knew something was rotten. But she also knew no one would believe her unless she brought back more than just a clip. She needed a pattern, a system, a web. And to find it, she'd have to go undercover in ways the Bureau never allowed. So she started small. Sheropened old complaints, cases marked inconclusive or dismissed. She cross-checked names, timestamps, and locations. She noticed things others missed. Officers disappearing from logs, cameras that malfunctioned only during Braxton's patrol hours, civilians rearrested for retaliating after complaints they filed. But the deeper she went, the more dangerous it became. One night, while meeting a whistleblower at an abandoned rec center, her car was tailed for 7 blocks by an unmarked vehicle. And another time, she found her hotel room tossed. Nothing stolen, just rearranged. A message. A warning. But Ayanna pressed forward because the truth was worth the risk. Then came the night in the swamp. She parked a mile out and hiked through the mud with nothing but a flashlight, a burner phone, and a .38 strapped to her hip. What she found was a shed filled with confiscated body cams, dozens of them. All wiped, all linked to officers under Braxton's command. But one, by some miracle, still held audio. Not a video, just sound. She took it. She played it later in her motel bathroom, where they locked the door and the lights were off. The voices. They muffled their voices. But one phrase chilled her to her core. If she talks, we bury her like we buried Marcus. Marcus. A name she didn't recognize then, but would never forget after. She later discovered that Marcus was an internal investigator who had gone missing in 2017. His case was unsolved, but Ayanna found his traces in sealed files, encrypted emails, progress reports, complaints filed against Braxton, and then silence. It became clear Marcus had been close to the same truth. Too close. And he'd been erased for it. Ayanna didn't sleep for 3 nights after that. But she didn't stop either. She went to Marcus's mother, a soft-spoken woman who hadn't heard from her son in 8 years. Ayanna didn't promise answers. She only asked questions. Together, they retraced his last steps, combed through journals, phone logs, and boxes of half-read case files. That's where she found it. A name Marcus had circled 3 times. Officer Price. A name long buried, a man who had quietly resigned and moved to a fishing town 5 states away. Ayanna tracked him down and knocked on his trailer door at midnight in the pouring rain. He didn't want to talk. He was scared, broken, but she stayed. On the porch, for 3 hours. and finally, trembling, he spoke. "Marcus figured it all out," he said, eyes hollow. "And they killed him for it. I couldn't stop it. So I left." Ayanna wrote everything down. And that night, she knew what she was up against for the first time. Not just a corrupt cop, a network, a machine. And yet she still chose to stand in front of that courtroom and expose it. Because no one else had the courage, Ayanna never told the public how many times she nearly gave up, how often she cried in gas station bathrooms. She had once vomited from fear before stepping into a precinct rigged with false trust. How she watched her name get quietly blocked in bureau circles. Too emotional, some said. Too obsessed. They didn't know the half of it. Didn't know she once hid in a stairwell for 6 hours waiting to copy a hard drive. She memorized surveillance camera rotations to sneak into a locked storage room. That she once faked a car breakdown to meet an informant off-grid. Unbelievable? Maybe. But for Ayanna Pierce, it was just survival. Every step closer to the truth made her a bigger target. One day, she returned to her motel to find a dead bird nailed to her door with a note. "You're next." Another night, she received a voicemail of herself walking down the street, humming. Someone had recorded her without her knowledge. She knew they were watching and listening and waiting for her to slip. But she never did. She just kept moving, kept documenting, kept surviving. All of it, every risk, every lie, every sleepless night, led to that moment in court, where she stood in heels and a tailored coat, calm as ever, holding a federal folder in one hand and justice in the other. No one clapped then. No one cheered. But the silence that followed? It was heavy, reverent. A room realized what it had just witnessed. But now that the courtroom was quiet, Ayanna was left with the aftershocks. There are things she still hasn't said. She still carries secrets that no one else knows. People still out there, angry, dangerous, who want her silence. But she won't give it to them. Not now. Not after Marcus. Not after what happened in the swamp. Not after everything she lost, and nearly lost, to get here. Ayanna is still investigating. Quietly. Strategically. She's moved cities, changed numbers, and adopted aliases. She doesn't speak to the press anymore. Not because she's afraid, but because she knows the next chapter needs silence to grow. But if she were here right now, reading this, she'd say, "Truth always has a cost. I just pray it's worth the price I paid." So if you've followed her this far, if you're still listening to her story, if something in you aches for what she went through, don't just scroll away. Comment below. Leave words of encouragement. The world had watched Ayanna Pierce walk into that courtroom and dismantle a system built to protect men like Detective Hank Braxton. But they hadn't seen everything that came before it. They didn't see the nights she sat alone in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, wondering if this were the moment someone would pull her over, not to ask questions, but to make her disappear. They didn't see the memories she carried, the ones that never left her. Like the day she was 16, walking home in broad daylight, only to be slammed against a patrol car by 2 officers who said she fit the description. They called her combative when she asked why. One of them whispered "smart mouth" and spat at her feet. She went home with bruises on her wrist and a silence in her throat that took years to unlearn. Moments like that, silent, sharp, unforgettable, shaped the woman the world would one day call deputy director. But titles never erased trauma. And when Ayanna first saw Braxton's name on that sealed document, when she first read the words "corrupted footage," "erased reports," "civilian complaints discarded," something deep inside her cracked open. Because it wasn't just another cop, it was the same pattern, the same pain, the same enemy dressed in different armor. She didn't run to her superiors with her suspicions. She didn't gather a task force or make a formal announcement. She knew better. Racism doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes it wears a badge, a smile, and a handshake. So she worked alone, quietly, carefully, risking her position, her safety, and her peace. No one knew that Ayanna Pierce, a woman praised for her poise and precision, had spent nearly a year living two lives. By day, she was a top-tier agent. By night, she was a ghost in the machine, logging into restricted systems, interviewing victims behind closed doors, and following leads that led her into abandoned buildings, back roads, and the homes of people too scared to speak unless the lights were off and the blinds snapped shut. And every step forward came with a threat, a warning, a whisper that she was getting too close. But she didn't stop, because deep down, she wasn't just fighting Braxton. She was fighting every moment she had been made to feel small because of her skin. Every time she had to smile through disrespect. Every time she had to sit in a meeting and watch a less qualified man to receive praise for an idea she had whispered 2 weeks earlier. The risk peaked when she broke into the off-site archive facility used by Braxton's old precinct. It was raining that night. Sharp, cold, relentless. She picked the lock wearing gloves, heart pounding in her ears. Inside, she found rows of sealed boxes, but only one caught her eye, marked Reyes Incident, Audio Error. She knew that case, knew the woman Anara, whose life had been shattered by Braxton's assault, knew the footage had mysteriously vanished. She cracked open the box and gasped. Inside, hidden behind decoy paperwork, was a memory card. Her hands trembled when she played it later, alone in her hotel bathroom. It was all there, the truth. Anara crying, pleading, Braxton shouting, shoving, lying. It was the kind of truth that made you cry, not just for the victim, but for every person who never lived to tell their side of the story. Ayanna sat on the bathroom floor, head against the sink, and wept for Anara. For Marcus, the missing internal affairs investigator. For the girl she used to be. And when the sun rose, she stood up, dried her face, and began writing the report that would one day bring a man like Braxton to his knees. But the system didn't thank her. It punished her in silence. Anonymous emails, doors that stopped opening. Agents who once praised her now avoided her. One supervisor pulled her aside and said, "You're going to ruin your career chasing ghosts." But Ayanna had seen the ghosts and had felt their hands on her back, pushing her forward. Every case she exposed, every report she recovered, was another voice no longer ignored. And that courtroom scene, the one the world cheered for, wasn't the beginning of her strength. It was the end of her endurance. Because she had already escaped the real threat, a system that hoped she'd stay quiet, disappear, and give up. She didn't. She risked everything and faced the storm head-on. When she finally stood in court, folder in hand, face calm, heels clicking like a war drum on the marble floor, she wasn't just delivering evidence. She was delivering justice on behalf of every black woman ever dismissed, every black man ever silenced, every family that had been told, "Sorry, there's nothing we can do." And when Braxton led away in cuffs, his face slack with disbelief, Ayanna didn't smile. She didn't need to. The truth was finally louder than the lie, and for once, the courtroom heard it. Now that you know the truth, everything she faced and risked, can you feel it? Can you feel the weight she carried? The silence she walked through? The scars she hides beneath her strength? Ayanna Pierce didn't just solve a problem, she survived one. And if her story moved you, even for a second, if it made you pause, think, and feel, then how her? Press the like button, not for the headline, not for the spectacle, but for the truth. For the nights she cried alone and kept going. For the cases no one else dared to touch. For the power of one woman who refused to be erased. Like this story to honor Ayanna Pierce and let her know we see her, we support her, and we will never forget what she did. Absolutely. Here's a 1,000-word paragraph continuing Idea 6 into Idea 7, adding powerful events, intense emotional difficulty, and painful elements that deeply affect Ayanna Pierce. It continues her journey with emotional weight, drawing deep sympathy from the audience and reinforcing all that she has endured. After the verdict, after the flashbulbs faded and the courthouse emptied, Ayanna Pierce didn't go home to a celebration. She went back to silence. He returned to a dimly lit hotel room, where the walls seemed to close a little more each night, and the shadows grew longer with every hour. The world had seen the victory. Detective Hank Braxton sentenced, justice spoken aloud, but they hadn't seen what came after. They didn't see the sleepless nights, the lingering threats, or the way Ayanna now flinched when someone knocked on her door. Because truth-telling wasn't a triumph for her, it was a wound that kept bleeding. And though Braxton was behind bars, the network he belonged to was not. His arrest had shaken Charleston, but it hadn't cleansed it. In the days that followed, Ayanna's car tires, they slashed. Her hotel received bomb threats. She found her photograph taped to a lamppost downtown with the words "Snitch Queen" scrawled across it in red ink. And while some called her a hero, more called her a traitor. Former colleagues now crossed the street to avoid her. One of them, a man she once trained, looked her dead in the eyes at a coffee shop and muttered, "You should have stayed quiet." But Ayanna Pierce didn't come this far to be scared into silence. She had known this moment would come. She had prepared for it. What she hadn't prepared for was the loneliness, the kind that crawled into her chest and built a home there. Because she couldn't call her family after the death threat mailed to her mother's address, she couldn't attend church. People followed her car. She couldn't even walk freely through her city anymore without glancing over her shoulder every few steps. Her body was in one piece, but inside, everything felt shattered. And the pressure to stay composed, to look fearless, was suffocating. Every news anchor called her calm, stoic, unshakable. But they didn't see her curled up in bed at night, clutching her phone just in case she needed to hit record or dial 911. Then came the moment that broke her. She returned to the federal field office to pick up her remaining case files. 2 junior agents were murmuring by the vending machine as she stepped off the elevator. They didn't see her right away. One said, "You think she's doing this for justice? Nah, she's doing it for the spotlight. It's all performance. She's just trying to be the Black Erin Brockovich." The other one laughed. Ayanna didn't speak. She just kept walking, her shoulders straight and her face unreadable. But when she got to her office, she closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a sound she didn't recognize. It wasn't a cry. It was between a scream and a whisper. Raw, guttural, human. She didn't want the spotlight because that's what they didn't understand. She didn't like the press, the attention, or the endless interviews. She just wanted the pain to mean something. She wanted every night she spent chasing the truth, every memory of being harassed, profiled, or ignored to matter, finally. She had given everything. And it still wasn't enough for them. She stared at the box of files on her desk. Inside were names, real people who had suffered under the same system Braxton helped protect. She picked up a folder. David L. Banks, 2010. Case dismissed without trial. She remembered David. Quiet man, arrested for resisting v. The charges disappeared, but his job didn't come back. His marriage didn't survive. His mental health never recovered. Ayanna had spoken to him just once. He told her, "Sometimes I feel like I got erased without dying." She never forgot those words. That's what all this was about. The erased, the forgotten, the ones who didn't make it to courtrooms or news headlines. And suddenly, exhaustion turned into something else. Resolve. Wounded, yes, but not broken. A week later, Ayanna requested reassignment to a rural field office in the South. No cameras, no attention, just work. She wanted to start again, away from the spotlight. She packed her things, hugged the few who spoke to her, and left Charleston without fanfare. But even as she left, she carried the pain with her. The memory of being racially profiled at 16. The time she couldn't shake the feeling they were trailing her home in college. The night a white superior told her she was too intense for leadership. It was the feeling of sitting in a courtroom, surrounded by men who didn't see her as a colleague, but as a threat. And the hardest memory was the moment she realized the badge she wore couldn't protect her from the system she swore to defend. But she didn't run away. She ran toward something, because even after all of it, the threats, the betrayal, the isolation, Ayanna Pierce still believed in justice. Not the kind that wears robes and speaks in verdicts, but the type that lives in truth, in resistance, in rising even when your voice trembles. She knew she would never be the same. She would never trust as easily. She would never feel completely safe, but she would keep going, because somewhere another victim was waiting to. Another file was waiting to. Another system needed to be cracked open, and Ayanna would be there, scarred, but standing. So if you're still here and have followed her story through every twist, betrayal, and heartbreak, take a moment to show her she's not alone. Press the like button. Leave a comment for Ayanna. Tell her you believe her. Tell her she matters. Tell her thank you for not giving up when it would have been easier to walk away. Because the fight isn't over. And Ayanna Pierce? She's still in it. Ayanna Pierce didn't expect peace in her new field office. Only space. She just needed a little space to breathe and think. To grieve in peace, without the pressure of cameras or the whispers that followed her like shadows. But even in that quiet corner of the Bureau's Southern Division, Ayanna couldn't escape what she'd been through. The pain clung to her like smoke. Each morning she stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Tired eyes, drawn face, the faintest tremble in her hands. She tried to hide from everyone. The world thought she was fine, that after taking down Detective Hank Braxton, her story was over. But Ayanna knew better. Because when you uncover truth this dark, it doesn't leave you untouched. It stains your spirit. And the worst part? There were days she wondered if it had been worth it. Days when the silence felt like punishment. Days when her agency still treated her like a threat rather than a hero. They moved her out of the spotlight, yes, but they also moved her out of the conversation. Her emails went unanswered, her follow-ups. And slowly, painfully, Ayanna realized something no one wanted to admit. Sometimes, the system doesn't just punish those who lie, it punishes those who tell the truth. And yet, she stayed. She stayed because someone had to. She stayed because the names in those folders still needed someone to believe them. She stayed because justice doesn't live in the courtroom, but in what happens after. So when a letter arrived on her desk, handwritten, no return address, she didn't hesitate to open it. Inside was a simple message. Braxton wasn't the end. There are more. You were just the first to shine a light. Attached was a printed photo of 3 officers. One of them had the same eyes as Braxton did. Cold, proud, confident he'd never. Ayanna felt her breath catch, not because she was scared, but because she knew. Deep down, she knew. That night, Ayanna packed a go-bag just like she had a year ago when she first started down this road. She left the office without telling anyone, drove 6 hours across state lines to meet a former precinct clerk who'd requested anonymity. They met in the back of a shuttered diner, lights off, a booth lit only by the glow of a flickering neon sign outside. The woman was shaking. She handed Ayanna a flash drive wrapped in tissue paper. "I've held this for years," she whispered. "They told me if I ever spoke, I'd be next." Ayanna reached out and gently touched the woman's hand. "You're not alone anymore," she said. And momentarily, the clerk wept, relieved, seen, human again. The flash drive contained dashcam backups, audio logs, internal chat threads, evidence from at least 4 other cases where black civilians endured brutality and officers covered it up using Braxton's same methods. And once again, Ayanna found herself pulled into the fire. She knew if she brought this forward, they'd try to silence her again. But she couldn't ignore it because this wasn't just data. It was proof. It was blood. It was lives torn apart by a lie disguised as law. And if she didn't act, who would? But the moment she filed her first report, the backlash returned. Her office was searched for security protocol. Her access to databases mysteriously slowed. They yanked her into a closed-door meeting and asked if she was still emotionally stable enough to handle field work. The room had 3 men and a file full of paper. Not a single question about the evidence, just questions about her. Her tone, her health, her motive. Ayanna smiled calmly, stood up, and left without answering. Because she didn't owe them her pain, and she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of watching her fold. Instead, she reached out to survivors, one by one. Quiet meetings, phone calls, midnight coffees in parked cars. She listened. She documented. She promised them their voices would rise, and every name she added to her list made her shoulders heavier, but her heart more determined. Because Ayanna Pierce won't stop fighting. Not now. Not ever. She's just getting started. But what she needs now is you. Yes, you. The one still listening, reading, still here. She needs to know she's not alone in this next chapter. So if her story has moved you, if you've felt the fire in her words, the ache in her silence, the strength behind her stillness, press the like button right now. Not for the headline. It's not about the drama, but for the truth. To say, we see you, Ayanna. To say, we're still with you. To say, keep going. Your support matters. Your voice matters. And with your help, Ayanna Pierce will not be erased. Because the system may be fractured. But people like her show us that we can rebuild ourselves. So like this video, leave a comment. Let Ayanna know. She's not fighting alone anymore. Ayanna Pierce had always known that truth came with a price, but she never imagined how steep it would be. After exposing Detective Hank Braxton, she could have stopped and walked away. I took a safer post, wrote a book deal, and faded quietly into the background like so many others who rattled the system just enough to be remembered, but not enough to be hunted. But Ayanna? She didn't want remembrance. She wanted a reckoning, and when a coded email arrived late one night, unsigned, untraceable, its subject line simply reading, "There's another one. Atlanta, East Sector. Check the riot logs." She packed her bag without hesitation. No one knew she was leaving. Not the Bureau. Not her family. Not even the few allies she still trusted, because this wasn't authorized. It wasn't protocol. It was dangerous, but it was right. She drove overnight to a storage bunker hidden beneath a police transport station just outside Atlanta. Rumor had it, this was the dumping ground, where footage, files, and inconvenient evidence went to disappear. As a local auditor with a forged ID and a borrowed badge, Ayanna talked her way into the maintenance wing. Deep beneath a flickering emergency bulb, she found a sealed cabinet labeled Riot Control, 2019. Inside were 10 hard drives, most of which had been wiped clean, but one, misfiled, half-hidden, held everything. A body cam video, 3 officers, an unarmed black teenager, behind a dumpster. The footage was time-stamped, but the official report from that night claimed no force had been used, despite the evidence. The case had been closed. The boy had disappeared. Ayanna's hands shook as she watched the final seconds, when one officer leaned close to the lens and muttered, "He'll keep quiet, or he won't wake up." She knew what came next. If she had submitted it through official channels, it would have disappeared again. So she did what no one expected. She leaked it anonymously to a local newspaper under a burner alias. The story exploded. Within 48 hours, the footage went viral. Protests erupted. The Atlanta PD launched an emergency review board. But no one knew who the source was. Ayanna stayed in the shadows, watching from cheap motels and public Wi-Fi hotspots, always moving, constantly erasing her trail. And still the messages kept coming. Secret files, hidden names, disgraced officers connected through unspoken codes, a map of misconduct that stretched across departments, counties, and even states. One name kept appearing over and over: C. Morrison. Who was Morrison? Ayanna dug through sealed federal reports, encrypted folders buried so deep it took a former NSA contact to crack the headers. What she found was stunning. Morrison wasn't a cop. He was a private contractor trainer who had worked with over a dozen departments on aggressive compliance strategies. Every precinct he visited had one thing in common: a spike in civilian brutality complaints within 6 months. He had no badge, no uniform, just power. Quiet, systemic power. And Ayanna knew, if she could find him, she could connect it all. She flew to Denver under a fake name and tracked down an old whistleblower who had attended one of Morrison's trainings. The man was in hiding, paranoid, scarred. But Ayanna knew how to talk to people like him. She told him the truth. "I'm not here to save your life. I'm here to give it back to you." He handed her a thumb drive. Inside were internal memos, recordings, and surveillance images linking Morrison to the same suppression tactics used in Charleston, Atlanta, Chicago, and New Orleans. And at the center of it all? A secret quarterly meeting held under the name SHIELD Protocol. It wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was real. And Ayanna had proof. Now she had to make a choice: go public and risk getting burned by the agencies she once trusted, or vanish again, disappear into the underground, continuing her work from the shadows, risking her safety daily to finish what she started. Ayanna chose the second. Because she wasn't in it for the headlines, she was after change. But change like this doesn't come easily. She's now living off the grid, moving from city to city, still investigating, still exposing, still fighting. And here's the part that you need to hear. Ayanna Pierce is still out there, still uncovering the truth, still risking her life to bring justice to the places no spotlight reaches. But she can't do it alone. She needs your voice, your encouragement. So comment below, right now. Say, "We believe you, Ayanna." Say, "Keep going." Say, "You are not alone." Because in a world that tried to silence her, you can be the one who helps her speak louder. Let her feel your support in every word you write. Let Ayanna know. The world is watching. And we're with her. There was a moment, just before the courtroom doors opened for the final hearing, when Ayanna Pierce stood alone in the marble hallway and felt her knees go weak, not from fear, but from memory. The weight of it all came rushing back. The night she was pulled over at 19 and forced to sit on the curb while 3 white officers searched her car without cause, mocking her scholarship application they found in the glove box. The day she was the only black recruit in her class, she overheard a trainer say, "She won't last. Too proud." And the years that followed, where she smiled through disrespect, nodded through gaslighting, and worked twice as hard just to be called qualified. She remembered when she found the flash drive that exposed Braxton, and how every step after that moment came with risk layered deep beneath the surface, stolen files, shadow meetings, late-night breakdowns, and threats whispered like promises. She remembered how close she had come to giving up after the raid on her office. She sat in her car for hours, asking herself if it was worth it. And now, as the courtroom doors creaked open and sunlight poured across the tile, Ayanna straightened her back, because this was the moment they said would never come. The moment a black woman, once silenced for asking the wrong question, stood at the center of the storm, delivering the truth. The judge called the room to order. Ayanna stepped forward, her voice steady, her evidence airtight. She laid out the chain of misconduct, the buried body cam footage, the falsified reports, and the systemic abuse masked as procedure. And as she spoke, something powerful happened. People listened not just with their ears, but with their hearts. She saw it in their faces, the reporters, the jury, even the court staff. They weren't just hearing her. They believed her. For the first time. For real. And when the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, Ayanna didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just stood there, still, holding the memory of every victim whose voice had been silenced and buried for far too long, and finally knowing that silence had lost. But even after that moment, she didn't stop. She traveled. She exposed more officers, more cases, more lies. She gave up comfort, safety, sleep. She faced rooms where she was the only one who looked like her, where her truth was labeled too aggressive or too emotional. But she kept going because the system that tried to erase her identity would never erase her mission. And now that you know everything Ayanna Pierce has endured, from racism to retaliation, from loneliness to near collapse, you understand the power behind her every decision. You know why she couldn't walk away. Why did she risk everything? Why did she keep digging when others told her to quit? It wasn't just justice. It was survival. It was a legacy. It was her life's purpose. So if you feel something right now, if your chest is tight, if your throat is burning, if you wish you could stand beside her in that courtroom, press the like button right now. Let Ayanna know that her fight wasn't in vain. Let her know that someone is still listening. Her pain reached beyond 4 walls, that her truth mattered. And if you can, leave a comment to encourage her. Because Ayanna Pierce carried the weight of a broken system, she took it with dignity. Now it's time we have her. Ayanna Pierce stood beneath the vast southern sky, her coat dancing in the soft wind, as she looked out over the city she once fought in, bled for, and nearly lost herself to. The storm was over now, not because the world was perfect, but because she had dared to fight for a better version. The system finally delivered justice, and with it, people rebuilt their lives. Truth had finally spoken louder than power. And though the system was still flawed, still fragile, Ayanna had done something no one else had been willing to risk. She cracked it open wide enough for the light to get in. The scars she carried would never fully fade. The late nights, the betrayals, the endless threats. But neither would the victories. Neither would the names she helped vindicate. Neither would the lives change because one woman believed no one was above the law. And as she finally allowed herself to breathe, She knew her story wasn't just about fighting corruption. It was about becoming the person she once needed. When she was a teenager on the side of the road, humiliated and unheard, that moment shaped her. And now, she had rewritten what came after. If there's one lesson Ayanna's journey leaves us with, it's this. You don't need permission to do what's right. You don't have to wait until it's safe. You don't have to wait until you feel ready. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is speak when everyone else is silent. Whether you've been dismissed, disrespected, or discriminated against, your truth matters. And change doesn't begin with a courtroom. It starts with courage. That might mean calling out a wrong, standing with someone mistreated, or refusing to accept that the way things are is the way they'll always be. Ayanna risked everything not because she had to, but because someone had to. And in the end, it wasn't her badge that gave her power. It was her voice. And you have one too. So if her story moved you, if you felt her pain, fire, and resilience, don't let it end here. Press the like button to show Ayanna that her fight lives on, in every voice that dares to rise. Leave a comment below to thank her, to honor her, remind her, and every real-life Ayanna out there that we believe in truth, in justice, in them. And most importantly, subscribe to the channel to follow stories like Ayanna's. These are the stories that matter. Stories that give voice to the silenced and strength to the weary. This world needs more light. That's why we do this. And sometimes, it only takes one story to spark it. Let that story begin with you.